I think sometimes we follow paths for so long just because it's what we've always like talked about. And that was me. Like everybody knew I loved music. Everybody knew I wanted to do it. My parents have always been really supportive. And, at that point they had like invested a lot in me. And it was like scary to think of not doing that thing or going after that dream anymore.
Hello and welcome to All of the Above. I'm James Brown. Thanks for joining me. You can check out my work at jamesbrowntv.substack.com. And of course, like, share, and subscribe anywhere you're watching or reading. It really helps the show. One of my favorite things to do, as regular viewers know, is to learn about people who do unique work. Like today's guest, Mackenzie Reed. Hey, Mackenzie.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You can read her novel, The Rosewood Hunt, starting on Halloween, correct?
Yes, it'll debut that day.
It's a young adult novel?
It is, yeah. It's recommended like 13 and up, but kind of to every person's discretion.
When you say, what distinguishes a novel from young adult novel from a younger novel and an older novel? Well, help me understand.
Sure. So a lot of times it depends on the structure. Young adult novels tend to be a little bit chunkier than, say, middle grade, which would be kind of the age group below. And then you have chapter books and then picture books. And then you have even, I think they're called like cardboard picture books. So young adult is just typically you have your protagonists, which usually are within the ages of like 13 to 18. Sometimes we see that older, sometimes we see it a little bit younger, but that is usually what characterizes it because it depends on the voice. And my main character, Lily Rosewood, for instance, she starts the book at 17. She just finished junior year of high school. So it really like neatly nestles into that young adult category. And it's also kind of a, coming of age, figuring out who you are, where you belong in the world type of book, while also being a young adult thriller, trying to pack it all in there. So those are all really common young adult themes as well.
Were you a fan of this genre? Is that how it found you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big time. I've always been a really big reader, but I want to say I got really into young adult when I was probably in like 4th or 5th grade. So again, back then I was like 11. So started a little bit early. Like I said, it really just depends on who you are. And as an adult, I still read young adult and middle grade all the time. And I just knew when I started writing books, I didn't know about like young adult and middle grade. I just knew I liked to read and write. And then once I kind of started finding my voice and figuring out what characters I wanted to write, that's when it became pretty apparent that, at least for now, I really gel well with like the YA voice.
How old are you?
I'm 25.
Wow.
Not too far from there, at least when I started.
So from learning about young adult work and at 11 to 25, this is your first fully published book, correct?
Yes. Yep. My first one to make it all the way.
Well, that's an interesting phrasing. We'll get there. Because that's actually something I had planned in a little bit, but let's back up. So you're enjoying them. Do you remember your first ones that you enjoyed?
Ooh, I remember. So I will say, I think the first book that got me into reading was firmly middle grade, and it was The Sisters Grimm. And I know, like, if you went to Barnes and Noble today, it would be in the middle grade section. But I think the first young adult book that I really connected with was called The Mediator series. And it was by Meg Cabot, who actually wrote The Princess Diaries. But I hadn't even read The Princess Diaries back then. I started with The Mediator series, and it was about a girl who, it took place in, present day. but it was about a girl who could see and speak to ghosts. And she ends up falling in love with one. But then it was also just kind of, Meg Cabot has a very like rom-com voice. So it was kind of funny. There was always a mystery. So that kind of got me into mysteries too. And I just like tore through those books. And I don't ever since then, I just got really into reading. And then eventually I was like, I guess I'll try writing books as well.
You're tearing through these books, or is this over a period of months, years?
Ooh, it's tough to remember. There were 6 books in that series, and I will say I'm a pretty slow reader, but I probably finished the whole series in maybe 2 months. And then from there on, I just had to like keep visiting the library. I've always spent a lot of times at Barnes and Noble and local bookstores, and it just like really set me up to being not a fast reader, but a big reader.
And help me with the transformation from I really enjoy this stuff to I want to make this stuff. Walk me through how that happened.
It's so funny because I don't even know if I can pinpoint like a time, because when I was younger, I was really into music and really into writing songs. And I used to write a lot of songs. And then I've always been a very like visual person and cinematic. Like I always have, movies playing in my head. So I'd have these little like cut scenes from my favorite books in my head. And then I would kind of just run with them. So I'd be using their characters. And I got really into like reading fan fiction for a while, which is when people, take their favorite books and then they kind of just do complete spin-off things with them. And then after getting into that, I just started like coming up with my own characters, but then they would just live in my head. And then I got to the point where I could not like keep them in my head. And I do remember it distinctly. I was in middle school and I was in class, and I was always a pretty good student, but I did like have trouble paying attention. And thankfully my teacher was very kind, because I would sit in the back of class and I had a notebook and I had just started writing this book. It was a portal fantasy. It was just very, it was basically like fan fiction of my life, but me wishing I could like go into a fantasy world. And I spent, practically every class kind of writing in the back. I don't recommend it. I'm not saying you should like go, write during class, but I think that was the first time where I started writing something original. And then I kind of forgot throughout high school because I got busy. And then when I got to college, I decided to try and take it a little bit more seriously. And that's when I started like churning out books and, exploring traditional publishing and getting a little more involved.
Let's roll back a little bit. Fan fiction of your life?
Kind of. It's funny. Like at the time it was, a different character or whatever, but looking back at my 12-year-old self, I knew who she was, and I, had created a character who was on a swim team. I was on a swim team who, went to, this school, and that was kind of like my school. And, I lacked originality back then, but I think that's kind of how a lot of people start, whether it's their own life or, like I said, writing fan fiction for other books. It's a really good place to kind of launch yourself, where you have some building blocks already, but then you start filling in the gaps.
And as you're getting into this, are you still songwriting, or in what kind of songwriting?
I guess I wouldn't even know. I used to just write with guitar, and I've always been really inspired by like Taylor Swift and, artists like that. And I did write a lot throughout high school. And then that was kind of pivotal to my writing journey, because I went to Nazareth College. And when I applied, I wanted to be in their music business program, which like had songwriter as a career. And I was telling him before I understood like what being a songwriter entailed, which was like going out to California in some cases, and being a performer sometimes. And it was stuff I didn't actually want, but at the time it was kind of all I knew. So I would write a lot of songs. My freshman year of college, I was really focused on that path. And then I got a couple rejections, like back to back, in the music program. And it really forced me to like reevaluate and be like, okay, maybe this career path isn't for me. I think sometimes we follow paths for so long just because it's what we've always like talked about. And that was me. Like everybody knew I loved music. Everybody knew I wanted to do it. My parents have always been really supportive. And, at that point they had like invested a lot in me. And it was like scary to think of not doing that thing or going after that dream anymore. But I did switch majors. I switched to communications and media. It allowed me to take my writing more seriously. And then by sophomore year of college, I had a class and my professor, Leah Stacy, she had like taken me aside or written on a little piece I wrote and was like, have you ever thought about trying to get published? And that kind of really jump started my career because I was like, oh, like maybe there is more I'm good at than just writing songs.
You said rejections from the music program. So were you auditioning?
Yeah.
Okay. That had to be
Yeah.
tough.
I had auditioned for it and then it was very like strange. I got into the school. I got into the program in all aspects except for like literally, like I had the schedule with all the same students. I was taking all music classes for the most part. And then basically they had said like, okay, you have to like re-audition again in the winter after you do a semester of these classes. So I was like, okay, great. And I did. And then I didn't get it. And I was like, oh, well, to not get in twice, I feel like that's a sign. Because they were like, oh, you can re-audition again in the spring. And I was like, I'm okay. I stayed at NAS and I had a really good time there. But yeah, it was kind of a needed wake-up call, I think.
And it set up your transition, and which happens because of the encouragement of a teacher.
Yeah, definitely.
And those initial pieces, what were they that sort of drew her in, that made her believe in, well, the skeleton of what you've created so far?
I don't even totally know because it wasn't like I was writing books in that class. It was actually a feature writing class, so a little bit more, journalism based, I guess. But the piece we wrote was the, Modern Love, the New York Times article. It was basically, we had to write a piece like that. And I did. And which, those are nonfiction. So that is also out of my realm because I very much write fiction. But I did. And she just, really liked it. And it's funny because, like I said, it's not like that was a book. And I was working on a book at that time. So it wasn't even like it was the same thing. But just knowing that, like, the potential is there in my head, I was like, okay, well, if I could maybe get published in this, which I didn't, by the way. I did submit it to Modern Love and it did get rejected. But I was like, oh, if I could get published in this, maybe I can get published in this.
I was rejected from Modern Love. I know, I swear, I know 8, 9 other people who have become accomplished journalists. I know one Emmy winner.
Yeah, I'm gonna take it personal. I figured it is what it is.
They're very persnickety about Modern Love. So, and I'm sure they get tons and tons of applications.
Yeah, definitely. I remember I had kind of forgotten about it by the time I got the rejection, and I was like, oh, okay.
Do you remember the story?
I do, a little bit. I had written it about, I had just gotten into my first relationship with my boyfriend, who I'm still with actually, and we met at Nazareth, and we were like 2 months in, not even, we were a month in, and it was right after Valentine's Day, and I remember being very nervous about being like in such a new relationship, and if it was weird to like get things with hearts or like get things that said love because, we weren't there yet. And it was just kind of all about that.
And after you get rejected from Modern Love, Leah says, "Hey, like you really got something here. I like whether it's your sentence structure or whatever it is that drew her in." What did you start toying with?
Well, so I had started writing. So remember that portal fantasy that I started back in like 7th grade? That was all in a notebook. Kind of forgot but the bones were there. And now that I was older, I was like, okay, I know how to make this something more original. So throughout college and actually getting rejected from the music program was huge because I spent so much time practicing for like piano class and all these classes that I didn't have a lot of time to write. And then once I like let that dream go, I had so much time to write. Like between that and being with friends, it freed up a lot. So I just started working on that book. And basically throughout my next 3 years of college, I wrote a trilogy in that world.
Wow.
And yeah, and I just kept going. Like I didn't stop after book 1. I wasn't like, oh, I should maybe like edit this or, maybe I look into publishing now. Nope. I just had it all in my head and I needed to get it out. And it was, it got bigger with each book, like the worlds expanded and everything. So I finished that trilogy. Let's see. It was probably like the middle of my junior year. And then at that point, I had already had, Leah's class where she said, have you considered this? At that point, I had my parents behind me being like, are you going to do anything with this? And that's when I started, looking into publishing. It wasn't until I finished it, actually.
So this is 19, 20, 21? Age-wise?
Yeah. Yeah, it was about, yep. I definitely started it when I was like 18.
Okay.
And I'd say I finished all of the first drafts around 2021. And I actually remember because I was the end of my sophomore year, I went to Italy for like a study abroad, and I was in Bologna. And when I was there, one of my roommates had a book called Red Queen, which is by Victoria Aveyard. And I opened that book, I read it, I loved it. It was also a fantasy. And when I looked in the back, it said she wrote her book right after college. And I think for some reason I had it in my head, I was too young to get published. I was like, oh, I'm just like, nobody's gonna publish me like while I'm in college, which is so untrue because now there are people way younger than me with books coming out. But anyway, at the time, I just didn't even think it was worth pursuing. But when I saw her bio that said she wrote it in college, I was like, oh, okay, maybe I can too. And that book was actually also published by Harper Collins. So it kind of came full circle.
So you have a professor behind you. Your parents are behind you. Is any out one saying, hey, what the hell are you doing?
I think even though my professor knew, even though my parents knew, I was still pretty secretive about it. Not because I was embarrassed, but I think I had been so loud and proud about the music dream. And then, not that I was embarrassed how that ended either, but I think I wanted to hold this dream a little closer to my heart, just in case, like, people, got, I didn't want to look like I was just flying from one thing to the next. But I do remember that I had somebody who had said, I think, to my parents, like, just something about how, they didn't really see writing as a career. And it was all a joke. It wasn't, meant to be like mean or angry or anything. But that really sat with me because I just never looked at it like it couldn't be a career. And yeah, that was kind of I wouldn't say my motivator because I'm definitely motivated by how I love doing it genuinely. But I do also like a little bit of proving people wrong too.
Yeah, it's amazing because I'm just thinking of myself at a similar age, and it's amazing how much we think about things like that, like how permanent we think things are.
Yes, absolutely.
That you
Yeah.
were concerned, even though you had this other thing where folks around you like are encouraging you, you love doing it, but you're still concerned about this thing that I'm sure you enjoyed, but it just wasn't working out. I mean, it just I find it so interesting that and so human that we all think that like, oh, we can't pivot, we can't adjust.
Yes. I remember thinking that too when it came to changing my major. And it seemed like like when you're a senior in high school and you think you need to find a major, it's like such a big deal. You think like, this is what I'm doing the rest of my life. And then, then I had to change my major and then you realize everybody is changing their major. So, if you're going into college, don't get freaked out or anything. But I just feel like we forget how well we can adapt and we forget that change isn't always bad. And it certainly wasn't for me. And, people even change their careers a bunch throughout their life. So I I think that's a great point though. That we forget we can pivot.
So you've written at this point, you're late in college, you're a junior, and you've written a trilogy.
Mhm.
So and it seems like from that moment in Italy, you decided that you're going to try to publish these babies.
I guess so. Give it my best shot.
What was the best shot? What was the process like?
So it was a long process learning about traditional publishing. So there's traditional publishing and self-publishing. And honestly, like both are valid, both have their pros and cons. The reason I went traditional is just because that was what I knew. Like all the books I read growing up were mostly traditional. That was kind of what I had started learning about from the get-go. So I felt like I could maybe have a little bit more to stand on. Whereas if I was going to go self publishing, I'd have to start from the ground up with, teaching myself. And basically, I got really into like the online writing community, which at the time was very active on Twitter. And that's where I learned everything. I met friends. I learned about querying, which in traditional publishing, you usually need a literary agent before you can, they call it put your book on submission to editors at publishing houses. And that is really to protect you because a good literary agent is going to be like the middleman. They're going to negotiate for you. They're going to, vouch for you. They really have your best interests in mind. So I knew before I could even think about my book getting on shelves, I had to find a literary agent. And querying is when you're like pitching your book, usually via email or an online form. And then you just kind of sit and wait and hope that they are into it. Because if they are, then they'll request more work from you. And they usually want to see like the whole thing. And then if they read it and they like it or they have a vision for it, they hopefully offer to represent you. So that was the beginning.
That so I get the picture of traditional publishing. You're working your way up to get an intermediary to get someone to work on your behalf at the publishing house.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. That's basically it. It's almost like you have to, we always say the goalposts are moving, and that's because you finish a book, you edit a book, then you find an agent to represent the book, then you put the book on submission, then hopefully an editor offers on the book, then you have to edit the book again. Like it just kind of keeps going.
So at how quickly do you get from this midpoint of your junior year of college, which is, even wow, to
Yeah.
to someone at a publishing house saying, hey, I'll work with this person?
So it took, I feel like looking back, it probably looks short. But I actually, because I wrote the trilogy, I was only able to query with the first book, which I did very widely. I probably queried 60 to 70 agents. I got kind of close a couple times, and every agent ended up saying no for that. And that took me almost probably a year from start to finish. But I don't look at it as time wasted. I mean, I was learning so much during that time. And looking back, I totally see why that book, wasn't ready to get published. It had a lot of work that needed done on it. So then I wrote another book, and that one was probably written during like the last semester of my senior year, or I'd say my senior year. And that one I ended up entering like a mentorship competition with an editor, and we worked together on it. And then I queried based on like this little pitch showcase they did. And then thankfully with that book, I did get an agent. But because I didn't get an agent with the first book, I had to shelve the whole trilogy. So by the time I got an agent, it was with my fourth book, which, by the way, is not the Rosewood Hunt.
Okay, let's back up a bit. So
Mhm.
you're a senior in college, and you're querying agents, and you got close?
Yeah, thankfully, we call it a request rate, which is, how many agents want to see more of your book. So, because usually when you pitch it to them, they only read like the first 10 or 15 pages. So, when they want to see more, that tells you at least your pitch is pretty solid, or maybe you're just good at marketing. But, so I did have a few like good instances where they wanted to see the rest of the book, but the rest of the book did not hold up.
What does kind of close mean when with an agent query? What does that mean?
To me, it just means that they liked it enough to want to read the whole thing.
Okay.
There are some agents that get hundreds of queries a week. So if you catch their eye and they like it enough, I even had an agent who had like asked me some questions, for them to like talk to you at all, in my opinion, means, okay, they're paying attention. They like see me. They, might be excited about it. I had a couple agents when I would send them the full manuscript, they'd be like, oh, I'm so excited to read this. Thank you so much. And, then I got a rejection, which is just the name of the game.
Do they know how old you are at this time?
I don't think I ever like disclosed it in my query or online, but I'm trying to think. No, I don't think they would have. They probably could have figured it out with like a very quick social media check, but not that I, typically disclose it on social media either, but I don't think they did.
Do you think it would have hurt you? Would it have helped you?
I feel like back then I thought it would have hurt me. Now, I don't think so, because I feel like now it's becoming much more, I don't know if it's normalized or maybe it's just more public because of social media, but there are like quite a few people I know who are getting book deals even, under 20, like early 20s, under 20s. I think still probably 18 and up, but yeah, so I think, we're in a different time now, or just because of social media, it's a little more transparent. But back then I thought it would have hurt me, but I'm not sure it would have.
You walked us through this process of traditional publishing. Before we get to your triumph, what's non-traditional publishing? What do you mean by that? Is that an Amazon type thing?
So usually that would just be self-publishing, which I think can be Amazon. It could just be there's, smaller presses. I'll be honest, even I'm not sure where the line always is because there are definitely smaller presses in traditional publishing as well. And then I know with self-publishing, there are also smaller presses, but I think usually the difference is like, again, a big part is the agent, where traditional publishing, you usually have to, have them first before you can get on to the next part. And I feel like people used to think of it as like, oh, if you're self-publishing, you do all your own marketing, um, things like that. But in traditional publishing, a lot of us do a lot of our marketing as well. So I wouldn't say that's, a hard and fast distinction.
Okay. All right. And I would think it would be a faster process, I would think.
I think so. It seems like I think self-publishing, you have a bit more control over your timeline. I actually just saw someone earlier today comment and say, I can put out 5 books in a year if I want to. And, I can't. Like I'm contracted for certain books and they have certain due dates and things like that. And I think for some people, self-publishing, you have a lot more flexibility and freedom, and, you write, I don't know if it's whatever you want, if you get to consult with kind of someone else as well. But I personally know with traditional publishing, I'm going through the process of the next book. And it is like very collaborative and very, hands-on with everybody, which is really cool to see. But it's definitely different. And I could totally see how, it might not be cut out for everybody.
You're already moving on to your second book?
Yes, it feels like I'm cheating on the Rosewood Hunt.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm actually pretty much done with the Rosewood Hunt, but I'm in, marketing mode for it. And now I'm in plotting mode for a different book. So it's very, it's a new experience for sure, kind of juggling the two of them in my brain.
Okay. I'm going to reel us back to where we were. So the Rosewood Hunt is not your first rodeo, clearly. You were rejected by your trilogy. The book that followed, that you wrote pretty much your senior year of college. What followed that?
So that was the book that got me my agent. And then
the senior year of college book?
Yeah, my fourth book.
Your fourth book.
That one. And that was my first young adult thriller. So that one I kind of also had a learning curve because it was the first time I was writing like a mystery. And then keep in mind that was also 2020, which was the pandemic. And all of my like post-grad plans were up in smoke. I thought I would graduate, have a job, and everything would be great. And instead we were all in lockdown, of course. So during that time, I kind of wrote more of a survival thriller, and that was book 5. And I was writing it for me, and I just knew that it wasn't, as much as I liked it, I knew it wasn't going to make it, especially if my current book 4, wasn't making it. I was like, I know this book won't make it. And you just like have that feeling. So I never even showed that book to my agent. But it's funny because those characters might pop up later in a new book. So it wasn't until probably, I think, the beginning of 2021 that I started writing The Rosewood Hunt, which made it my 6th book.
Wow. So 6 bites at the apple before
a good chomp. Yep.
To the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say that doesn't happen. We'll raise some history here. We'll break out our sci-fi, go back, whatever.
Right.
This virus doesn't attack the world, doesn't eat our reality, right? For a while, and it's a normal graduation. And what do you think you end up doing in terms of work?
I don't know. I was a communications and media major. At the time, I was very like, there were some jobs I was really interested in because I had a few internships I really enjoyed. So I do wonder a lot if I had had a job right then, would I have ever, would it have taken so much of my concentration that writing would have gotten shoved to the back burner? Maybe. I do know I'm not sure I would have ended up writing The Rosewood Hunt because I actually got the idea for a book in a writers group I'm in, but we formed because of the pandemic. Like, we were all
Wow.
just kind of, lonely. And then we were all talking in the chat one day, and the idea just kind of bloomed from there. So I do think about that a lot. I'm like, if I was never in this group, would I have never written this book? And also, the Rosewood Hunt there's a lot of emphasis on loneliness and adventure. And during the pandemic, I think we were all kind of lonely, and I personally felt so starved for adventure. And I would walk every day past this like bunch of roses, and that was really like a huge motivator in building that world. So I don't know if I would have written it without the pandemic.
Where'd you intern?
I did quite a few. I interned at 585 magazine, which I loved, under Jane. I interned at Bishop Kearney, which is actually where I went to high school. And let's see, I had a couple others. I'm trying to remember. I think I had ended up doing like 4. But yeah, those are the 2 that stand out the most at the moment.
Okay, so I'm guessing Bishop Kearney was in their communications department.
Yeah, it was actually like alumni relations, but yeah.
And 585 magazine, you're probably writing, laying out pages, that kind of thing?
Yep, a lot of formatting. I did some editing stuff, and actually I did a bunch of PR stuff, which was really fun. I remember going to like an Oak Hill event, which, I had never been there before, because I think it was one of the years the PGA was here. So that was really cool. It was totally different than what I had done before.
I think odds are pretty good that if things are normal and we end up, sliding doors is my overused metaphor, that perhaps this jaunt into writing is delayed. That the pandemic may have been a gift.
I completely agree in some ways, because I think it took that to unlock this book that I had always wanted to tell. And I think it obviously, thankfully connected with who it needed to get it off the ground.
Thanks for listening to all of the above. Let me know what you think wherever you're listening, and do me a favor, share it with a friend. You can follow my work at jamesbrowntv.substack.com. Paid subscribers get access to bonuses, including 10 the Hard Way, our members-only show. You can reach me at james@rochesteraccent.com or jamesbrowntv@gmail.com. You can also leave me a message at 585-484-0339. We might have you on the show. I'm James Brown, and as always, be well.